We have a new book for you today. Peter, Oliver-Krueger and Michael Dougherty present their latest book, Shift from Product to People. If you want to download the book, you can go and download the latest 4 beta chapters in the URL bit.ly/shift_book. That's bit.ly/SHIFT_BOOK. That's bit.ly/shift_book. So go there, sign up, get the beta chapters, and give feedback to the authors. And now, on to the episode. Hi, I'm your host, Vasco Duarte. Welcome to the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast, where we share tips and tricks from Scrum Masters around the world. Every day, we bring you inspiring answers to important questions that all Scrum Masters face day after day. Hello, everybody. Welcome to a very special bonus episode. And today we have a tag team of authors, Michael Dougherty and Peter Oliver-Krueger, also known as Pete OK. Hi, guys. Welcome to the show.
Hello. Thank you.
Hi there. Good to be here.
So let's start with Michael. Michael, also known as Agile Mike, has over 25 years of experience with software development and product leadership. He is published under Built for Success, the column in CIO.com magazine, and held the position of vice president in the Agile Leadership Network. Michael has taught multiple SAFe courses over the past 3 years, and he says over 400 people. I don't know if that's still accurate, but certified SAFe, SPC5, AWS, Cloud Architect. Whoa, that sounds cool. ICP CAT, Coaching Agile Transformation, AHF, Agility Health Facilitator, Scrum, CSP, and PMP. That's quite a blend of initiatives there, Mike.
Yes, it's more acronyms than even I can remember from time to time.
There you go, and they're almost all TLAs, which of course is how they all should be. Then we have Pete. Pete is an entrepreneur, a speaker, a trainer, and a consultant for Agile, Lean Startup, and Teal management. He'll talk more about that, I'm sure. He specializes in the psychology of building product development teams, following the principles that how one introduces techniques is more important than which techniques one introduces. That's a very good point. I'm sure we'll talk at length about that in this interview. And he works closely with startups and enterprise organizations, exploring the question, what should we build? He started his career as an engineer at Carnegie Mellon's Robotics Institute, helped launch the first accredited online university, and has led agile transformations for USA Today, TD, Ameritrade, the IRS, and more. He's also the co-organizer of DC Lean Startup Circle. Guys, that's quite an intro. Let's now shift to what you guys are working on, which is really the book that you started writing. It's titled Shift from Product to People. What do you guys mean with shifting from products to people? What are the main differences that happen when we do that shift? Let's start with Mike.
Sure. What I have seen in the industry being so long, and by the way, Pete, I didn't know that you started a first university online. I actually did the first de novo bank based on a virtual address myself. I was part of it. CompuBank, they don't even exist anymore. But it was very thrilling back in the 90s to say, we have our bank in that way. So getting to the book, back then there were a lot of lessons I learned about that one too. And I've gone through hundreds, and I'm not exaggerating, of projects over time. And there's been a shift. I remember in the early 2010s that there was an overall shift going on in the industry from project to product. Rather well-known Midwestern Agile coach by the name of the dude, David Hussman, did a lot of movements around, we got to go to products, right? And that's become the move that we're seeing now, is that products are where the focus is with the end user. Yet from our view, that's not enough. There's a shift where product is great to focus on. It's better than working on projects. It results in better, more improved outcomes. But the shift to people can get you even farther. And I'm not just saying end users, I'm saying all people involved. It really comes back down to even the Agile Manifesto, individuals and interactions, right, over processes and tools. So this isn't something new, but it's more of, let's get into not just the why and the what, but how do we go about doing that so we can get to a better place as organizations?
Pete?
Also, the shift to people, I realized that going back to that university thing, when we launched that university, also in the late 90s, where everything was going online. And I didn't realize that I had a fantastic start to my career that most other people didn't do. We did a lot of usability testing for that university as we were launching it to understand, how our students were going to need to use it and how they interact with it. And it wasn't until a while later that I realized that not everybody had that experience and not everybody got a chance to do that. And that has been, I found, critical to my success coming up through the ranks and doing all the stuff that I've done since then. And I notice it now, and we're starting to talk about it a lot more now within the enterprise space as well. And one of the reasons why we call it this shift from product to people is because we've already done a couple shifts. And now this is really kind of like the third major shift, at least in the Agile space. So the Agile space itself introduced a lot of great ideas to take people from thinking about their work and what they're trying to get done to realizing that they're part of a team and that they have to work together collaboratively, cross-functionally, all those wonderful buzzwords. But that gives us a higher level of productivity. Then the conversation came up and said, well, it's not just enough to do work together as a team and project work. We really need to be thinking about the entire product that we're delivering and all the different pieces that go together. And some people made that transition to thinking about customers also, but a lot of people didn't. And so that's the thing that we really wanted to highlight here for those people who haven't done that, is that it's not enough either to just make a product, to work together to get something out the door if it's not something that people want to use, if it's not something that solves problems for the customers or the students or whatever it is. So that focus on the people is that next big transition that organizations need to make. And it takes a while to get everybody's sort of consciousness switched over, to thinking about the customer constantly with whatever you're doing. And so we're hoping to sort of lead some folks through the idea of how to do that in an organization.
So I understand that it's about focusing a lot more on the customer's needs, not necessarily the features. But what else is this shift from product to people about? And now I want you guys to talk more about what does it mean for us as Scrum Masters, Agile coaches, product owners, what in the work that we're doing to develop products. What does this shift mean?
So that's a great question. And the shift means that, first off, the book is intended for, yes, Scrum Masters, Agile coaches. In general, though, our chief audience would be the product management, product directors, product owners, and they're the ones that really lead the charge on the direction of what's going to be built, right? They're the CEO of the product and all of the chief lieutenants there coming up with the direction the product goes. And the shift, which Pete will, of course, explain that we have a lot of new ways of looking at things and how to go about it, includes the design thinking, the customer centricity. In Amazon, Jeff Bezos is famous for calling it customer obsession. And we've got that in there. And it's about really empathizing. And so with the end user, and there's a lot of tools already out there, but they're all bits and pieces all over the place. And so we are putting them all together in one central place as a narrative. So that way, and this is more both Pete and I, but more my feeling is that we also want to make it entertaining because the books that have been most influential to me have been narratives like the Phoenix Project with DevOps. And so I really got into DevOps and read every DevOps book I could put my hand on after I read the Phoenix Project. And it was very successful. Now we're looking at doing the same thing and give that narrative that will have people get drawn into it, related to, let's focus on people, the end users, what they want and what they need, but also those within the business, how we can improve our interactions. What can we do from a psychological standpoint, from a standpoint of people skills and the tools, and then use those, listening to each other to come up with better solutions, because no solution comes from the end user. The solutions are produced by the actual producer, and that would be any product management, product owner, and what they accept from the rest of any voice that comes into them.
Yeah, I think a lot of what we're trying to do is not necessarily for everybody. So if you've got a brand new team that's just starting in Agile, this is not the book for you. We really wanted to go into that experience that tackles the team that's been doing this for a while. So if you've got a team that feels like they've mastered Agile and you're trying to wonder what's next, then this would be a great sort of way to sort of transition into that, of what to do next and where to take the team, forward. Like Michael said, it's product managers, product owners, getting up into directors, even up to executives is more of sort of the focus of this book, because they end up changing and driving a lot of the direction that the company goes, a lot of the way that the process runs. And if they themselves don't really understand what the intrinsic part of this stuff, they probably understand their industry really well, but not necessarily understand how to deliver that vision or how to execute on that stuff. That's the stuff that we really wanted to capture in this book. And we like telling it as a story because we find there's a lot of misconceptions out there. There's a lot of content out there right now about all these topics. There's a few new things that we've put in here that aren't in any of the other books, but a lot of the stuff in here has been presented, and sometimes for decades, under various different names. But what Michael and I spend most of our time doing when we go into organizations is fixing those misconceptions, sitting down and helping people to understand where maybe they customize too fast and what they're doing is not actually the original intent of that thing. And so they're not actually reaping all the benefits of it. And so being able to tell the story of how an organization doesn't quite get it at first, then relearns it, and then tries to apply it, and then tries to take it on, and then the mistakes that they made, and then being able to fix those mistakes, that whole journey through the understanding process and the application process is just as important as the original idea to begin with.
So what I hear is that this might be a good book for Scrum Masters that feel that their team, although it has developed, although it has improved in their agility, they are somehow stuck, but don't yet understand that they are stuck. And maybe that Scrum Master wants to get some ideas on how to move the team forward. Do I get it right?
You get it right. I've heard people talk about sort of like the mythical 10x developer, or like which is not even just about the developer, but it's about a thought process about doing things. And if you feel like you're not going that fast, you're not reaping, you're hearing about all these other folks around you who are able to do a whole lot of other things that your team seem to not be able to do. Taking it back to the statement I was saying before, usually when Michael and I go in and coach people, we ask them about this and we realize that they said, oh, yeah, we've been using that technique, but we do it a little bit differently here. And then they describe how they customize the technique away from all of the stuff that actually would have given them all those benefits.
So one interesting thing, though, is you've already presented it, is the way you write that story. Now, all books are stories. Nonfiction books also have stories, if nothing else, anecdotes mixed in with the factual description of some method or whatever. But you took a different approach. And Michael already mentioned the Phoenix Project, which in itself is inspired by books like The Goal and other books. So describe for us, what are you trying to do with this narrative approach, where you literally tell the story of a hero, right? The person at the center of the narrative that goes through all of those learning highs and lows that you were just describing. So why did you choose that narrative approach? And more important, what does that look like?
Right. So I'll go first in this one because this is definitely, although Pete's brainchild, I got to admit it does count as something rather unique that we're doing here. And it was a little bit of a challenge for me. So it's written in a format that's based on books that both Pete and I love, that are not Agile books in any way, that are not really educational books, and pretty much anyone would know them, and that's Game of Thrones. And maybe some lesser known, more geeky crowd would know the Expanse series. And they're written in a third person narrative that is past tense. And let me tell you that it also allows characters to change. And so that's one of the reasons why once Pete brought up the idea and said, "Hey, Michael, we should write a book. I've got an idea." And I'm like, "Okay, let's do it." I've been wanting to write a book like this for quite a long time, over 10 years. And now I even want to write it more because of the learnings I've gained over the past 5 years in particular. And that third person narrative and changing the perspectives allows the reader, depending on who they are, whether they're a Scrum Master, like you mentioned, or an Agile coach, or a product manager, or a designer, or a team member, you're going to have, we expect, some affinity and relationship. You're going to go, "Yeah, I'm that person," or "I feel like I know that person," or "I know a person is like that," right? You're going to identify, and we're going to get a little bit inside their heads and get their perspective of what's going on with the current situation, and then the changes that happen, and then the end results. And so we thought that would be really good to get everybody to kind of see their view, but also make it a little bit more holistic, because we know that in a lot of Agile books out there, the leadership will just pick what they want, or whoever's adopting it, and as Pete mentioned, and then kind of dissect it and remove stuff they don't like about it until it's formed in what they want. This is meant to kind of put it all together, so they're not just picking from a cookbook of which recipe they want, and then they change the recipe.
So before we go to Pete, there's something you said that I want to explore a little bit further. And we've mentioned this already in the intro. You're trying to bring up the perspective of multiple people in a company. So it's not just the hero's perspective, it's also the people around them. And one of the things that I'm really excited about is that this also has the potential to allow us as coaches, Scrum Masters, product owners, to start to understand the perspective of the other people we've had trouble working with. So Pete, talk about that. Talk about how you built this psychological landscape within the story.
Sure. That really is a great way to describe it, a psychological landscape. We found that as we were introducing it, just telling the story from one point of view isn't enough. It's about all of these different personalities and roles and jobs that have to come together in order to produce any product. And if you don't have all of those pieces on board at the same time, heading at the same direction, aligned, then things can easily go off the rails. So we did this, and it's I forget what the name of it is, but it's something like third person limited point of view, or rotating limited point of view is sort of like the official title into this sort of writing style that Game of Thrones and Expanse
So Game
uses.
of Thrones, basically.
Yeah. And so how each chapter, started it from a different point of view, and then we would see the world from that person's point of view. And then you might go back and see the same setting from somebody else's point of view and see it completely differently. Or you might jump onto pick up the narrative with somebody else in the next chapter. So that's something that happens with us. So, you start with our heroine, and she introduces sort of the problem with the organization. And then we jump back and forth through a couple other folks. We go to the manager of the division, and we see what it's like from his point of view. And then we jump over and talk to one of the designers. Well, not talk to, but one of the designers talks about his point of view and how that happened. And then we jump over to the coach, and the coach now delivers, her perspective in looking at all of these different pieces, and then we carry it on in through that. And we also did a 3-part structure to the book because it is supposed to be instructional as well. So the first section is a few chapters to really establish the problem and to introduce the coach and have the coach take a look at what's going on and sort of do a little bit of a diagnosis to understand and align with the teams as far as what's happening there. And then we get into the sort of instruction part. And so then she's going to guide each of the the teams, and we see the different perspectives as the ideas get introduced to different parts of the company. One part of the company gets one technique, a different part of the company gets a different technique. And that's not necessarily something we could have done with a traditional narrative structure. But we are also kind of keeping it so like each chapter itself is going to be about a technique, so that if you want to go back and use this as a reference and go back to the chapter about big room planning, for example, or customer discovery and interviews, you can go to that chapter and look up that stuff. And we're going to keep most of that content right there in that section. But then we found out that wasn't enough either, which is why we started calling this the Game of Thrones, because it just started like, it wasn't enough to just even talk about the instruction part of it, because then, like I said, people misapply that. And so we have our coach go off on an excursion, like vacation, and leave for several months, come back, and then spend some time with the group again. And we get to see how the techniques naturally sort of evolve back into what people used to be doing. And now we can call out and say, hey, so we noticed this pattern in organizations where you start to go back to doing this. And that's actually more project thinking, or that's more, product thinking, but not customer thinking. And so that we can call out those differences and try to do a little bit of that fixing in part 3 of the book.
So it's also a bit like empathizing with the reader's journey, because the reader will have to go through that. Like, Scrum Masters also go on vacation, even if it's just 2 weeks, like in the US. I'm so sorry for you guys. In Europe, we have 4 weeks vacation.
Only 2.
So when you go out and then you come back, some stuff has changed and you need to reassess. You need to do that, kind of the assessment again, right? And see, where things have been misapplied, what ideas have been well understood, but not really applied, and so on.
Yeah. And one of the things that I found is, it's one of the principles I live by, is that people do what they do because they believe it's the right thing to do. And even when they do the wrong thing, they feel they're doing the wrong thing for the right reasons. And so that was sort of baked in sort of the idea and the concept behind this as well, because people will shift back to things they did before. People will add new elements of their own for very good reasons. And if you don't spend time to understand those reasons, if you don't spend time with the people to really understand their perspective, then you're not going to know why they made those changes, and you're not going to be able to get them to realize, we call it sort of reframing the picture, get them to reframe the picture and see it from a different point of view. So they realize that, oh, I need to do this, not because for me, but because for you. That's often a thing that pops up, is like, why do I have to do this thing? This doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. Like, why do I have to run unit tests? I know my code works.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And then when we look at it on the longer perspective, and it reminds me of a guy who told me that he was not responsible for fixing bugs. As a developer, his responsibility was creating the code, and then it was somebody else's responsibility to fix the bugs. That kind of floored me and everybody else in the office. But it gets into that place that when we think about just our own job, we miss, I'm going to say 80-90% of the actual work that's involved in rolling out a product, and especially satisfying customers.
So the book explores the story of the heroine, and that means a female hero, just in case somebody thought it was a drug. The book explores the story of a heroine who goes through that shift, right? And we are still talking about the shift from product to people, and learns these new approaches to help herself and, of course, the team, the company succeed. What are some of those new approaches you advocate in the book? Let's start with Mike.
Yeah, sure. Right. First off, let me just say that one of the things that we're very aware of keenly is that we've also included, you mentioned heroin, not the drug, but a female lead, is that we've really included a lot of the multiculturalism to it and made sure that we have an even mix of all types of ethnicities and backgrounds and personalities, and all different kinds of roles that you would typically see within an organization helping out with delivery of any product or solution. That takes a lot of thought and consideration. We do keep, with one exception, we do keep the first names only, and the names imply nationality and so on, but we never really say this person's from this country or that country. That way, everybody also gets a further identification, because at least someone in there that would be someone they could identify with themselves. And so as far as the actual new ideas we have in here, a lot of them are Pete's. I got to admit, he's the brainchild here. He's the hamster or gerbil on the wheel that ideas are always spinning out of his head. I swear he's probably got 2 new ones right now going on while we're talking. And I like to implement the ideas. So we're kind of like the Batman and the Robin. You can guess who Batman is. He's over there, and I'm the Robin. But I do have some few ideas that do come up and get introduced as well. Over time and experience, you learn where you can tweak things and do improvements. And I'd prefer Pete to go over some of his great ideas, but I'm just going to throw out some teasers. There's like the double aces, which is a great way of listening and getting to the root of what's going on. The ratatouille principle based on the movie, not on the food, but you could say it's related to the food because if you've seen the cartoon, it's got lots of cooking going on there. Minimum viable products. And then we have something that is often got a controversial, in my opinion, results, and that's having to do with what's traditionally called assessments, but we don't call them assessments. It's more of an alignment, and we have a name for it, and we've been doing a lot of work behind it. Pete's started off, and I've been coming into it, and that's the Agile Mindset Mapping Index. It's a different way of approaching it, as opposed to, oh no, here's another one where we got to assess ourselves and all that. So those are some of the concepts. And Pete, what do you want to add to that?
Yeah, we have the coach come in, and the first thing that she does is align with the groups, and that's a big part of that. So we're big fans of Simon Sinek and Start With Why and Infinite Game, and his Just Cause and all that kind of stuff. And there's a phrase that I like to use. It's called aligning your whys, sort of getting to understand that. And so we've got some techniques in there about how do you create alignment when you're coming in brand new. So if you're a coach, you're an external person, you're walking into a brand new team, how do you create alignment, as well as teams that have been working together for a while may not be aligned? And then how do you create that alignment out of that? Big step to kick all of that off is listening. So as Michael was mentioning, I've got a technique called the double aces, which evolved from a teaching technique. And I won't go into the full history of it. I'll leave that for the book so people can read it. But basically, it's all about that. How we present and how we talk makes a big difference. Our brains are hardwired to find and see the differences and what's wrong with what's happening. So when we get into conversations, usually the first thing out of our mouths is what's wrong, what's missing, what's the problem. And that can actually create a lot of conflict, when you get into certain situations, and you have to train your brain to do something it's not supposed to do. And to start with appreciations and acknowledgments, and then to ask clarifying, confirming questions before you get into any enhancement or evolving ideas is sort of the core of that double aces. And so it was like double A, double C, double E is those 3 steps. And so we present some ideas like that help them to restructure how they think so that they restructure how they behave. Another place that comes into play is you can't really do customer discovery, lean startup, design thinking type techniques if you aren't able to do that listening, because such a big portion of that is about not talking, not leading the folks that you're talking to. And so we talk a lot about customer discovery techniques, how to do customer interviews, how to really listen to your customers, understand them so that you can then craft a solution based on their needs. But it's that pairing together of listening and then solutioning. And a lot of people do solutioning without the listening. Tossed in there another concept that we're working on called the American metrics. So the American metrics, because it's...
Let me guess, they're just bigger.
No, those would be Texas metrics. No, the American metrics, and I just call it that because we found out that when I'm trying to get people to brainstorm about how they can affect their customers, it falls into generally 3 categories, improving people's quality of life, their liberty of choice, or their ability to pursue happiness. So it's life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, Declaration of Independence. And so that's what, so I've called it revolutionary metrics, and I've called it American metrics over a while. And revolutionary just sounds too confrontational for a lot of enterprise folks. So we stuck with the American metrics. But the other main things are really getting into how do you apply the scientific method when it comes to designing products and talking to customers. And a big portion of that is minimum viable products, which I find is one of the most misunderstood concepts out there. And so I put a lot of stuff in there at various different places to really talk about MVPs and what MVPs are and what MVPs aren't, and the important differences.
So you also help communicate what MVPs are and aren't, right?
Yes. For example, like when I drop a couple points along the book is if your MVP is more than a month, it's probably not an MVP.
That's a big hit for a lot of organizations, right?
Yes.
If you're starting from scratch and your MVP includes software, it's probably not an MVP.
Sounds like a good new show. You might not be an MVP if the line there.
Oh yeah, definitely. That would be also a comedy show, I'm sure. You just pick stories from real life and everybody would laugh. Okay, so we're getting close to the end, guys. So before we do go, I want to ask one more question. For us as Scrum Masters, what are the main takeaways that you think the readers will get from this book? Michael?
Yeah, so this book is, to me, if it goes as we expect, and we've already been sending this out to readers, there's been over a dozen readers that are from that background, Scrum Masters, product owners, and product managers, also published authors and so on. And first off, we want them to be entertained, but they've got to have some sparks that will lead into, I've been through this, I know what it's like. And I've tried the other methods and it's sort of working. Even 10% better, as I like to say, for any transformation, or I like to call them evolutions, definitely not revolutions, evolutions, because it never ends. Transformations imply there is an end date. That there is, okay, we've gotten 10% better, but how do we go farther than that, right? Most coaches find that they get stuck at a certain point, and sometimes it's because the client isn't ready, or they run out of tools that they can try. And that's where we come in with this book, is that now we've got a more holistic set, and maybe some of the implementations that have been done have things that were implemented a little bit off, and we're providing more insights on that. So it really gives new ideas and practices in a different way to take your organization, your agency, your enterprise to a further level and put them all together in a systems way, and see how they affect each of the different contributors, if you will, that are involved in the actual delivery from all perspectives. So from there, we are looking at lean startup, design thinking, lean portfolio management. Pete mentioned Simon Sinek as influence. We've got other influences of like Take the Ship Around by David Marquet, the goal, the lean enterprise, of course, lean startup, Eric Ries, one of my favorite books of the past 10 years, and many other books that we have that are influences here. We're putting together, bridging the psychology and the people skills with actual practices together.
How about you, Pete?
Well, I'd say for Scrum Masters, I think some of the key takeaways will be, one, if you are not already intimately familiar with all the different roles, not only within your team, but within the organization around you, we plan to introduce you to those so you can start to understand how those people think the way they do and why they are asking for those things, so that you can better coach your team to integrate with the other teams in the organization. I'd say also that word coach is a big thing. I've been talking about for years now that the Scrum Master is really the coach at the team level. And I'm happy to hear that popping up in a lot of other places as well. As Scrum Masters, our jobs are to coach the teams. And when we think of ourselves that way, it changes the perspective. I've seen a lot of, anti-patterns, of how people treat Scrum Masters. But one of the most effective and best way to do that is as a coach. And so then as a coach, the more you know about what's happening, the more you know about the different perspectives, the better a coach that you can be to be able to bring in things and be able to solve the problems with your team by picking and choosing from, so I noticed that this person's having this problem. Here's a technique that could help that person. Here's another person that's having this problem. Here's a technique that can help that one. And I think the third main thing that I'll say is actually in that space of that idea of sort of problem-centered. That ends up being one of the keys of customer-centered development, just understanding the problems of the customer and then providing a solution that could be software, could not be software, but that solves the problem. And if you're not solving problems, you don't have a product. And that's one of the big problems that people run into. So this is like the technique that I use, and that's baked into a lot of the chapters that identify a problem with the team and then come in with a solution that solves that problem. So we're not coming in to push a whole bunch of new things onto the teams and say, do this, do this, do that, do this, do this. That's a push model. The whole philosophy that comes from Kanban of like pull model, is also aligned with this idea of identify a problem, identify a potential solution to the problem, maybe 2, 3, 4 different solutions. Let the teams, play with each of those 4 different solutions, figure out which one works best for them, and then implement that. So that kind of customer-centered strategy also applied as a coach to your own team is another big thing that Scrum Masters could take away from this book.
Thank you for that, guys. Unfortunately, we're getting close to the end, but before we do share with us, where can we find out more about you and the work that you're doing? Pete, why don't we start with you?
Sure. I have a site where I've been capturing a lot of this Agile mindset shift place. So that's the library of agile.org. If people want to go check out that website. So just library of agile.org, and also available on LinkedIn. If people want to connect and chat or ask any questions.
Absolutely. And we'll put the link to those on the show notes. How about you, Michael?
Yeah, sure. So I also have my own website too that's called Lean Agile Enterprises, all one word, no dashes, and that's leanagileenterprises.com. And you can see all about me and others that are within my own small group. Of course, LinkedIn these days, Microsoft has hit it out of the park out of using that. LinkedIn is always a good place to reach out to me. And if you wish to connect with me in any way, have good questions, don't try to be marketing to me. But in any event, I am more than happy to connect with you if you've got real problems you like to talk about in the space of how to improve delivery. Other than that, I would like to mention, I'll do a shameless plug that Pete and I are going to be speaking together at the Washington, D.C. Agile Coach Meetup on November 2nd, one day before the U.S. Election Day. That's coming up, which is pretty exciting. I think everyone's going to come to this meetup instead of watch what happens with elections, but I could be wrong. So that one is called, and you can see we've got a lot of different perspectives we can do here. It's called From Foe to Friend, How to Evolve Your PMO. I have a tremendous amount of years of background running Agile project management offices, as they're still called, which is, it's hard for me even to say that without wanting to clean my mouth. But it's still got a lot of a good resonance to it. And there's a lot of great changes that are happening and will happen in the future related to the PMO. So it'll be a good one for anyone to join.
All right. Now we'll put the link on the show notes so that everybody can see all of those contact points and websites. Thank you very much, guys. Thank you for your generosity with your time and your knowledge.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.
We really hope you liked our show. And if you did, why not rate this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes? Share this podcast and let other Scrum Masters know about this valuable resource for their work. Remember that sharing is caring.